Hello, and welcome to Enabling Omni-Commerce Through Tokenization. I'm your host, Donna Perkins, and our moderator today is Sharon Skase with WEX. We have a couple of housekeeping things to get through. First, next slide. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on Conexxus365.org. You can ask questions via the GoToWebinar interface on the right-hand side of your screen. Please don't ask any vendor-specific questions, but go ahead and get your questions in early so that we can get those to the speaker. Our webinars also may be used for PCI continuing education credits, and you can contact us at 365@conexxus.org for questions regarding a certificate for qualifying events. Next slide. And here's our disclaimer slide. Conexxus does not endorse any products or services that may be described or mentioned in this presentation, and the views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the speakers and not of Conexxus. And of course, Conexxus is not offering legal advice. As always, we are so grateful to our 2022 Diamond sponsors. We are so grateful for your support and appreciate helping us keep these great webinars and great education content published. If you're not familiar with Conexxus, we are an independent, nonprofit, member-driven technology organization. We set technology standards for data exchange, data security, mobile commerce, loyalty, point-of-sale back office, and more. We provide vision through identifying emerging tech trends, and we advocate on a technical level at other organizations to help steer the conversation around standards and policies so that changes don't negatively impact your business. And you can find us in many places. You can find us at Conexxus.org. You can find us at Conexxus365.org, and you can always find us on LinkedIn. Now I'm going to hand this over to Sharon Skase, our moderator, to introduce our speaker.
Hi, everyone. I want to introduce you to our speaker today, who is Dan Coates. He is a solution evangelist for ACI Omni-Commerce with almost 20 years payment experience. His focus is on solution use cases, insight, and thought leadership for merchant retail in the card-present e-commerce and m-commerce space. He has led payment system implementations for major petroleum retailers and has developed payment software for ACI's Omni-Commerce platform, as well as implemented large-scale projects for many top global brands. His early roles at ACI included senior lead positions in engineering, architecture, and consulting. Please welcome Dan Coates.
Sharon, thank you so much, and thank you, Linda, for introducing earlier. I'm so happy to be here. Sorry, Donna, I apologize. See, we're already having fun. I'm so happy to be here today. Once again, I'm Dan Coates from ACI. What is a solution evangelist? I get to talk to you guys. This is one of the best parts of my job is I get to be on webinars. We get to talk about exciting, fun topics that are out there in the world of payments. And I do have a specific focus within C-Storm Petroleum. So I wanted to get into this today. So what are we talking about today? This is enabling omni-commerce through tokenization. So I actually just recently did an executive level discussion at the NACS level talking about this. So the execs got this, but what you guys are getting today is a little bit lower in depth into what does omni-commerce really look like when you have the brass tacks of it, when you actually have to implement it. What does it look like behind the scenes? So we'll take a look at it from a high level, but we're also gonna look from a technical level exactly what it means when you are implementing it and going through it. But so I'm going to do a little bit here with regards to, first of all, we're going to do a little bit of why. We're going to go backwards so we can go forwards. Then we're going to talk a little bit about tokenization specifically and what it is, and a little bit about that connective tissue that we're going to be talking about. And then we're going to go into really specific in depth. So in terms of unified commerce, tokenization has a very specific and special role to play, and that's what we'll be talking about today. And I'm going to go through these 6 use cases so that way you can see the nuts and bolts as to why it is so important. Like I said, before we go forward, we have to go back. So if we rewind the clock back into the 90s, it was really simple back then, right? It was cash, it was card, it was check, and it was just in store. And we never had this thing called the internet or the World Wide Web of anything. It was just a single, simple channel. And then we rolled into the 2000s. And when we did that, we started adding e-commerce, but it was completely separate, right? You know, e-commerce didn't touch the in-store experience. This was a separate website. So if you walked into a store, even if they had a presence on the web, they didn't have they didn't know what you were talking about. When you talk to the in-store folks, they're like, oh, that's on our website, or that's on some website that looks similar to ours, but really it's a completely separate company. Well, then that started evolving, and we start getting into where we see things today, which is that they are connected in some ways, at least in the sense that maybe there's the same login, but there's still kind of a separate experience. Sometimes what you do online doesn't necessarily impact what's going on in the store. And then we started evolving these experiences to online ordering or buy online pickup in store. And so now where we're headed, this is kind of what I call future present, because some have implemented this and some of us are still on a journey there, is that we have a smart, connected, unified commerce experience where each component as part of the customer journey and payments experience knows about what's going on in other parts, such that the digital and the physical are being connected together, that what you do in the physical world impacts the digital world and vice versa. So that's all fine and good, but why is this important? What's so important in terms of doing this? Why do we need to do this? Well, when we look at it from the perspective of the analysts, and the analysts really like to do these things where they'll group groups together, where, for example, 451 Research here on the left-hand side, they kind of divided merchants into the digitally driven ones and the digitally delayed. And they said for the digitally driven ones that payments are really, really strategic for those companies. They view it as very, very strategic. Meanwhile, on the ones that are digitally delayed, they value it less. And the ones that are really delayed, they have no value for payments at all. They don't think of it that way. And why is that important? Well, here's the payoff. When you look on the right-hand side, when you talk about Forrester says that these ones, and they kind of grouped them and tranched them. They said the very leading edge, well, they're growing almost 3 times as fast as their competitors. Then the high performers are about 50% ahead of the rest of the peers, and then there's the rest of the peers at the bottom. So that's why it's so important that you have a really effective payment strategy, because what we're seeing is the companies and the firms and the merchants that are really at the top of their game when it comes to payments are the ones that are really reaping the benefits here. So what do I mean by this when I say, oh, we have to have an omni-commerce experience? Well, the best way to show you what an omni-commerce experience is to show you what it's not. And what it's not is when we have separate systems that are processing all the different payments. So I've got a separate system for in-store, and I've got a separate system out at the forecourt, and I've got a separate system for my mobility, and I've got a separate system for my website. And that is not the same experience across the board. We're looking at 4 different panes of glass in this example, 4 different data sources. How do I get a coalesced view of everything in one place? It just doesn't happen. What we have to do is have a single platform. If we're able to route everything into that single platform, now I can do cool things. I can look at a singular portal, a singular dashboard for looking at things. And for doing that reporting, I get a holistic view of who my customer is. I now can look at fraud in a way that is holistic throughout the organization, instead of saying, oh, well, this is my problem on e-com and this is my problem outside. Help desk and others that are needing these reports can now see across all of these different channels what's going on. So that's why unified commerce or omni-commerce is important. But today, as I said, I want to go in depth into tokenization. So you probably know a lot about tokenization already. Essentially, tokens enable you to take a card number, something sensitive, a PCI sensitive value, or any sensitive value for that matter, and replace it with an alias. And that's what we're doing here. We want to replace that with an alias because that alias is not sensitive. And it enables us to do a lot of really good things. Let me show you an example of what's not good when we talk about tokens. If we have multiple token vaults, much like on the previous slide where we had multiple endpoints for processing our payments, all of a sudden if every one of those has their own token vault, well, that doesn't help us at all. It certainly keeps us secure and sort of notionally secure, but it doesn't help us in terms of having a singular experience where I'm able to track those customers across those different journeys, and then of course reward them and of course provide additional data and insight to my business. What I really need is to have a singular experience. I need to have this experience set up and configured where I can see exactly what's going on. It's all going into one platform. And then I am able to appropriately route my transactions. I'm able to appropriately see those transactions, and I am able to reward everybody in the path. So high level, I'm going to be talking about today 6 use cases for tokens. First of all, we're going to talk about PCI compliance. We're going to reduce that footprint, soak up all of that bad stuff. We're going to talk about convenience features, one-click checkout. What does that look like? A frictionless loyalty system. How can we do that? Subscription. This is becoming really interesting, and I'll kind of also talk a little bit more about paid loyalty programs and why they're so important and why they're catching on so significantly. We'll talk a little bit about this use case, refunds and returns without a card. Digital wallet, I think this is the obvious one, and we'll mention that when we get there, but digital wallet or a digital keyring. And then finally, the ability to upsell or have follow-on transactions. So as we're getting into this, the other question is I'm going to talk about Omni tokens. I'm going to talk about a token that we at ACI, but others as well, issue specifically to the merchant. And there's a bunch of other tokens out there in the market, as we'll find out. There's issuer tokens. We know that as PAR, payment account reference. There's network tokens, and we've seen this with Visa and MasterCard. And there's acquirer tokens that the major acquirers do. So everybody seems to have a token. And then you can even get into further that there's DPANs and things like that. So the question of the day is, why merchant Omni tokens? What is so important about having that Omni token? Well, from my perspective, I think it's really important because issuer tokens, well, first of all, you can't use those for payment. I think they're 25 digits long, and so they don't even fit in the right field. Acquirer tokens can't really be taken out of that domain of the acquirer, and network tokens today are pretty limited in terms of that they only exist in the e-com world. And they also carry a per transaction cost. And we'll get into that in a minute as well. That's actually an area that's very dynamic at the moment. You may be aware of some changes going on there. Meanwhile, the benefits of the Omni token is that they're flexible. We can use them across any channel, any mode, anything. They're simple. It's a single value that's easy to manage instead of having to manage all of these other values. And finally, we're making it powerful. The ACI implementation that we're working on specifically, we're going to make it powerful because we're associating attributes with it. So you can associate, say, a loyalty ID or that network ID or that acquirer token. All of those things can be associated together. So let's dive in to these specific cases. I'm going to first of all talk about PCI compliance. And when I do this, I'm actually going to pivot to an example, to a case study from a business that's actually outside of C-Store and Petroleum. So we had a major hotel chain that experienced a lot of PCI pain. Let me show you what I'm talking about. For their properties, they actually had set up a point-to-point encrypted solution with all of their properties. So any dip, tap, swipe that's happening was A-okay, it was fine. But what's interesting in the hotel world is that they have all of these other different entry points that input transactions, that input payments data. And so whether that's travel agencies or app reservations or travel expense management systems or website traffic, I actually have a really good story from this, and I hope you as an audience will appreciate this one. These travel expense management systems, perhaps you've seen them before. They're ones like Concur, and there's a few others out there. And some of them are really slick. When you stay at a hotel, it just magically occurs in the system. And you're like, how in the world did that happen? Well, the dirty little secret to how that happens is that they actually send a really long file that has all of their members and all of their card numbers that exist within the system. And so they send that off to the hotel and they say, has any of our members stayed here? And so you can imagine every single week that they're doing this, they're sending a file that has thousands, maybe millions of card numbers. This is not secure at all. So all of a sudden you have this bad data trying to leak back into the corporate environment. And this can happen in a lot of ways. This is just a specific example. So what you need to have happen here is we need to turn these into tokens. And so what we did for them is, in addition to having tokens that whenever we processed in those secure payments over point-to-point encryption and generated a token back, we actually had a batch management system for all of these tokens coming in from these files. And so when those files came in, we would take the files, parse out the card numbers, and replace them with tokens, and then send them on to the hotel chain. And the hotel chain was then able to match up those transactions based on matching the exact same token. So that was a really big benefit to them. When you think about this for your organization, you can apply this in a lot of different areas. Typically, I used to have a colleague that would say that that payments was the third rail of IT. Don't step on it. What we can see in this case is that you can now share payments data with other portions of your organization. So whether that's customer service or business intelligence or returns management, we can now do all of these things. We can exchange the data and play around with it, because if we're just replacing it with tokens that are not PCI sensitive, we have a really big advantage. So as I mentioned, I'm going to try in many cases here to kind of illustrate what this looks like at a high level. And I've got 3 cases here to kind of run through, and I've done some animation. So if everything works with this on screen, you'll be able to see this work nicely. So this is the inline tokenization example. And this is what we do for our customers is when they send a transaction up, what happens on that transactional channel. So we're going to send in that data, and then it is going to go off to the system that's processing it, and we're going to get a response back. We're going to attach the token and send it back. So that's a really nice, effective way to do it. This is called inline tokenization. You send up a transaction with that sensitive data, and bear in mind that may be coming from e-commerce or m-commerce, in which case it's secured with the appropriate internet protocols, or it may be coming from the store, in which case we highly recommend, if not enforce P2PE or validated point-to-point encryption there as well. So let's take a look at the next example. This is a token API call, and we actually offer this both in the transaction channel and also as a separate JSON RESTful token API. So in this case, it's simple. You send up the card data and you get the token back. So this is the way it's set up. And then we can return attributes with it. This case, I said, well, you could put a network token. Really, you can put anything with it. I gave a couple examples here, and I just put attribute 3. You can dream up all kinds of other really interesting attributes that you would like to associate with that token, such that when you get that data back, all of a sudden, you've got access to a lot more information. And then finally, the batch translation example that I was talking about earlier. We have this big file. It's got all this bad data in it in terms of being all PCI sensitive. We're able to pass that through, and it comes out clean on the other side because it's all been tokenized. So that's a really nice benefit there. So moving on to number 2, let's talk about convenience features. One-click checkout, frictionless loyalty, frictionless registration. I'm going to specifically talk about frictionless loyalty today. What happens today in the world whenever we have customers come up for this is for a lot of different loyalty programs, where you'll prompt the user for their phone number or have them scan something. And I frequently engage in all these loyalty programs myself, and I get really frustrated when I forget to enter my phone number. If I'm at the pump, I'm in a hurry, and I forget to enter it. And then sometimes I debate, well, should I cancel the transaction and wait? And then sometimes when I cancel and hit the cancel button, it'll take 20 or 30 seconds to wait for that to time out before I can go again. And if I'm in a hurry, it makes me very, very anxious. But what if we could stop that leakage? This is the challenge, is that we're leaking loyalty data. We don't want to leak it. We have customers coming up that are part of our loyalty programs, but we don't always get them recognized because they don't always enter in their phone numbers. So the solution is that we can actually leverage the token with the loyalty system to ensure that we don't leak any more loyalty data. We can register them. So we could do this in store or at the forecourt by potentially prompting them and say, hey, would you like to store your loyalty ID or your phone number with the payment? Yes or no. We could do that. We could also do it through our app online. We could say, would you like to add a payment card to your loyalty such that you get recognized every single time? This would be a huge benefit because, again, we want to track our users. We want to honor our users, honor our customers, and give them the rewards that they are entitled to. We also want to understand and know their journeys and how we can best please them. So this is really, really critical. Let's take a look at what this looks like in reality when we take a look at the diagrams, because who doesn't like a good diagram? So we have our transaction. We're just going to run this into the platform, and then it is going to go off. We're going to get our response back. We receive the token from the token vault, and then we're going to send it on over to the loyalty host. And this could be done in one of 2 ways. You could again, have that attribute for the loyalty ID sent off to the loyalty host so we can get the data back, or maybe the token is registered as another alias for the loyalty account. In any case, all of a sudden, we just executed loyalty and brought up the appropriate rewards and brought up the appropriate earning without having to enter a phone number. And this enables us to get rewarded every single time as a consumer, and also to benefit the merchant every single time, making sure they have more known customers within the system. All right, next one is subscription and paid loyalty. And I want to go into this. I was mentioning this a little bit ago. This is a really interesting space. What we're seeing in terms of loyalty, and I picked up some of this data, is that when you're looking at it, we as people subscribe to a lot of different loyalty programs, but there's very few that we actually engage with. More than likely, I'll go into a store, you'll go into a store, and they'll be like, "Oh, are you part of our loyalty?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know. Let's just try my phone number. Let's see if that works." There's certain programs, there's certain vendors that I work with, certain merchants out there that I absolutely know my information, because maybe I'm in a higher tier, or I go to them frequently and I can absolutely see what's going on. But a lot of cases, it'll basically be like I mentioned, where you'll say, "Yeah, I don't know, I'm probably in your system. Let's just try the phone number." So that's what we see here, is that over 2/3 or nearly 2/3 of consumers say they engage with less than half of the loyalty programs to which they belong. 41% say they engage with less than 1/4. So you have to think that there's all these different loyalty programs out there, and for the consumer, that's a lot of noise. And so what we're seeing is that there's a desire to have a paid loyalty program, because paid loyalty programs enable that consumer to get some skin in the game. All of a sudden, they are engaged because they paid some money. Maybe they get some kind of a benefit. Maybe they get a discount. Maybe they get an opportunity to buy things early. In the case of C-Store Petro, we're starting to see this in terms of clubs, in terms of having a coffee club where you're able to get a coffee every day, or a fountain club where you're able to get a soda fountain drink every day. But in order to have this, we have to have a recurring payment system. We have to have a subscription system that sits behind that. And what's interesting is that Visa has now started doing some interesting things in terms of network tokens. So Visa is this month actually raising their interchange rates for e-com. And you're like, "Oh, e-com doesn't apply to me." Well, in terms of this connected world, we're all in e-com now. We're all in m-com now. We are all in card present now. So Visa is raising their rates, but they say, "Look, but wait, if you use our network token, then we'll lower that, we'll drop it back that 10 basis points that we moved it up." So this is becoming interesting, that there's a fight out there for which token you use at what time. And we at ACI, we really want to help merchants with that, help them understand it, and also help them keep agnostic with regards to all these tokens, because there's ones that come from the network, and there's ones that come from acquirers, there's ones that come from all over the place, and we want you to have access to all of them at all times. So here's what it looks like from our perspective when this happens. The consumer performs a transaction in-app, or they register their payment type. So in this case, if you're just registering it, you're not actually making the transaction, and that's the case we're showing below. We get the Omni token returned. But with this new network token service, you actually, once that happens, you actually have to go and register a token. So they have to give you a network token from the network token service. And then we have a subsequent transaction. So we're just going in and paying our once a month payment into there for our subscription. And then we automatically generate. So there's this other half of it called having to generate a cryptogram, and it has to be sent to that network token service. This is to make sure that the amount is the same, and it's coming from the right merchant, and it's the right token and everything. And so they're trying to add the security layer in. And so that's what's happening. And so this is how Omni tokens solve subscription problems, because you don't have to worry about these network tokens. If you can just focus on one single token that ties it all together, now I don't have to worry about acquirer tokens or network tokens or issuer tokens. It's just one, because the service is handling it for you behind the scenes, which is very, very convenient. Refunds and returns without a card. We actually have a merchant that does this. They're outside the C-Store Petro space. They do get more returns in those areas. This is pretty straightforward. One of the nice things is that they put it on their receipt. They embed it in their receipt, typically in a barcode. And so they're going to process that through. And as you see, that translates it. We get the, we take the token, translate it to the card number, we get the response back, and they're set to go. And this is very convenient, especially for this retailer. Happens to be a clothing retailer where somebody goes and buys something at the store, somebody else goes and returns it, and they don't always necessarily have the card. So now, because we have the benefit of being able to put this non-sensitive value with limited scope sitting on a receipt, now we're able to effectively process these things and make it much more frictionless and make the customer smile. Next, digital wallet, keyring. Okay, this is kind of like a well, duh. Wallet, of course. Why didn't I think of that? Yeah, I mean, this is what we're using online for a lot of our wallets, especially in mobility. Anytime I'm storing something in an app, we should absolutely always be using tokens, right? We should be putting them all in there because we don't want to store sensitive card numbers. We want to make sure that everything is instead stored within that secure token vault and not stored directly on the device in the clear, things like that. So yes, we're just going to go ahead and translate those to tokens, and then we're able to process. What's important about this, though, is which token are you going to use? And I'm going to argue again and say, you want to make sure you get something as agnostic as possible. You never know when your CTO, CIO wakes up in the morning and says, you know what, I don't know if we really want to be with this acquirer anymore. What other options do we have? Maybe we could go to a multi-acquirer solution. Maybe I want to add another payment type that is outside the scope of what I'm looking at. So we want to make sure that we have something that's agnostic, something that we as a merchant own in case we want to go somewhere else, and something that's consistent, something that's generating values that are appropriate for your system. Sometimes that has to be a format preserved token. So I'm not going to dwell too much on that. I think everybody understands how wallets work. And then finally, I like this one that I'm talking about, upsell and follow-on transactions. I have this idea out there. Maybe it's a little bit crazy, but this is what I want in my world. What I want is when I go out and dip, tap, or swipe my card, when I'm getting fuel, I have about 5 minutes while I'm sitting there. I should get a text message that says, "Hi, Dan," because, by the way, remember we had that token. You know, if we dip, tap, swipe our card, we'll send up the request on the authorization. We'll get the token back. Maybe we'll get the loyalty ID, either one, or the token is an alias. We're able to send that off to the loyalty system. The loyalty system should generate a text message, say, "Hi, Dan, thanks for stopping by. I know what pump I'm at, right? We know what store we're at. You know, would you like, you know, I see would you like to bring, or could we bring something by to pump 3? Could it be a 100-gram bar? Okay, that's my candy bar. That's the one I like. We're gonna do that, or maybe a 20-ounce Diet Coke. I know they're a little bit juxtaposed, a little differently there. Either I'm good with the Diet Coke or bad with the 100-gram. I'm not sure. Or could I bring both and just have the best of both worlds? And I should be able to, you know, reply back. And because not only we have that token, we know who you are, we have it in the wallet. Everything should be clicking here. We should be able to execute that transaction and have somebody bring it out. You know, labor shortages notwithstanding, maybe this is where we need a drone, maybe just a rolling drone that'll roll out to the forecourt. But I think this is a really good example where we're tying all these use cases together, at least several use cases together, where we have that frictionless loyalty combined with the wallet and bringing it all in one place. So this is a high-level view of all of the different use cases that we can use tokens for, why having that Omni token is so important, and why unified commerce is so important. And so with that, if you have any questions, you obviously can reach out to me. I've got my LinkedIn information there right on the page. You can see it right there. And that about wraps up. I'm going to turn it back over to our host. Thank you so much, and we'll be waiting for questions.
Thank you, Dan. Always an interesting conversation that we have with you. Taken lots of notes. Wanted to remind everybody that the link to asking questions so that we can go over those. Learned quite a bit on the evolution of payment all the way through the 6 use cases on tokenization and why Omni tokens are so important to us. So I want to thank you, Dan, for this excellent conversation.
Okay, are you guys ready for questions?
We are.
We are.
Okay.
So let me take a look here and remind everybody again that you can just type your questions in there, but I will start going through these. Okay, the first one. Dan, is there any situation where you wouldn't use tokens? You wouldn't recommend using tokens?
Yeah, sure, that's a good question. And the answer is I think of two very specific cases when I talk to merchants about this. One of them is when you have to send a payment to another payment system that's outside of the rails that you normally send. So they don't know about that token, so you have to detokenize there. The other one is typically an assistance with legal requests from law enforcement organizations. Somebody runs into a pump, somebody does something, there's lost, stolen, there's some kind of legal occurrence that has happened. And so therefore you have to go ahead and get that detokenized as well, and then you can provide them with the actual raw data. So at a high level, that's kind of what we look at in general in terms of non-token cases.
Very good. Hopefully we don't run into those too often, but. So another question we have here, if I've implemented point-to-point encryption, does that mean I don't need tokens?
Yeah, that's another good one. Point-to-point encryption is part of a multi-layered security strategy that includes tokenization, because once you typically point-to-point will save and protect you when it comes to dip tapping and swiping your card and it going up to the payments platform. But on the way back, in order to identify that, you have to provide some kind of evidence of that card number. You have to put something in. That's where tokenization comes in. This is where I typically say, that's leaking data back into the environment. That's why we want to make sure that we use tokens as part of the environment, such that we don't push that card number back after we've decrypted it, after we've done the point-to-point encryption, spent all the time and effort on that. We don't want to leak that sensitive PCI data back into the environment.
That's a very good point. Okay, so then we have the reverse question. If I've implemented tokens, do I need to worry about point-to-point encryption?
Yeah, also a good question. Again, it's part of a multi-layered strategy, and yes, you absolutely need to, because again, when you dip, tap, and swipe at the pump or inside or anywhere else, we haven't got that tokenized yet, right? So we don't know what that token is. We would be sending up data in the clear, and that's obviously a vector for compromise in that area. So, when I typically talk about it, when I talk about it in sort of 4 layers. One of the layers, the bottom layer, is EMV. And I actually saw some statistics earlier this week that said, hey, you know what? We're actually doing really, really well in the industry. We're starting to see rates of counterfeit fraud really decline and get very close to where they were and are for the inside. So that's the base layer. Then we've got point-to-point encryption. Let's make sure that card and cardholder data stays safe when we go from the pin pad from the outdoor payment terminal or the indoor payment terminal, and then we send it up to the payments platform. Then we have tokenization, which again makes sure that we're appropriately using this token, we have flexibility to use it, we're not leaking PCI data back into the environment. And then finally, adding on top of that a fraud solution. If you start seeing fraud patterns, things where there's a high velocity, especially if you perhaps have your own fleet card or you are your own issuer, this becomes ever more important because we see different fraud trends. For example, we have a feature called Magic Carpet, which says, hey, look, it's not possible for a guy to fuel in Los Angeles and then 1 hour later be fueling in Florida. That's not theoretically possible, even if he were to fly or something like that. So again, a multi-layered strategy is important, and you can't just use one because it only protects one vector.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so this is going back to I split dial my transactions between multiple networks. Does this mean that I can't use tokens because I have 2 payment networks?
Yeah, good question there as well. So for our customers, we actually take care of that split dial issue because all of the transactions go to our centralized platform. It's basically a switch platform, and then we split it out from there. So if you think about the switch being the thing that you split dial with, and that enables us to use tokens everywhere. In a traditional sense, if this would be a limitation if you were going direct to processor and we're split dialing directly from the site, because then yes, you could get a token from your acquirer, but you're not going to get a token from that second provider. And whether that's value added, it's like Blackhawk or Incom or somebody else, you're not going to get that consistency. And as shown earlier, that I showed way back at the beginning, you have all these multiple channels and you're not getting the same token back. So what's critical here is to have that centralized processing platform where we can, send up that normalized message and then have it route and split from there, and that way you do get a consistent token. And so you can even have situations where in some cases that transaction gets sent to acquirer A on one transaction, but later on, maybe several days later, maybe we've switched the weighting as to which processor we go to, or maybe just the use case or specific conditions. It could go to processor B, and there's no problem because we own the token vault. We've managed the token vault. Those are owned by the merchant, and it can be routed anywhere.
Great. Okay, now I have one about loyalty. When linking loyalty cards to payment card tokens, is there a best practice for confirming that the card number truly belongs to the person? Could you ask the cardholder to enter the PAN, expiry, security code, and then run a $0 transaction?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of different ways of doing this, but I've envisioned that the best way to do it would potentially do exactly that, which is just do an account verification check and do that CVV. I've suggested also in terms of a use case, you could do frictionless registration. Look, we're dip tapping and swiping that card at the pump. If I'm able to enter in my phone number at the pump, say, hey, would you like to, get 10 cents off today? Download our app. We'll enter in your phone number. You get a link for the app. You'll have a referral ID in there that should link you up with the information that we just got. Now, obviously, we don't want to just randomly associate any card with that loyalty ID. So when they register, when they come into the app, we've taken care of the registration, entering a 16-digit number, entering the expiration date, entering the name on the card. This is a lot of friction that we just got rid of. But if we make them enter in that CVV, we can guarantee that they are the authentic user.
Excellent. Okay. So we're starting to see some increased interest in mobile driver's license. There's also interest in using this driver's license information directly in the payment transaction, maybe as the sole identifier. Where do you see the privacy or security issues, and not to mention the cost, in this solution?
Well, this is one that's very much future focused, and I think that it's going to unfortunately be a bit of a wait and see, because right at the moment we have to think about, in this case, we're going beyond PCI concerns. We're starting to move into PII concerns, and we're probably also moving into regulation concerns. Can I store these driver's license numbers? Can I store these IDs? And in all of these cases, we have to make sure that we're doing it appropriately. What I can tell you is that, at least with our token vault, we have in the past been able to store these identifiers and provide them to secure systems, not necessarily saying, oh, I'm going to parrot back that driver's license number in every transaction. But what I can tell you is that we have had cases where, instead of, say, storing a PAN, a card number, and giving a token back, we've been able to store, say, social security numbers and be able to give a token back in those cases, such that we're storing it securely, but then giving a reference to enable merchants to work with that data effectively.
Wow, just mentioning storing social security numbers makes me nervous.
That's why we have the secure system with all the with all the appropriate security, all of those acronyms that everybody loves.
Well, social security number and cell phone numbers. Okay, but on to people's real questions. Are there any solutions available that can link DPANs to the real PAN and return the same token? I have heard of something called PAR. Is this something that you're familiar with?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'll unbundle this a little bit. So a DPAN is a device PAN, and this typically happens when you provision your physical card onto your phone such that you can use it for tap to pay. And what happens in those cases is that the issuer, or through their token service provider, their TSP, they actually send you back a different card number, a card number that's not the same as the one printed on your card, but when you dip, tap, or swipe, when you tap with your phone, it sends up this different card number. It goes to the token service provider, and it gets translated into the original card number, gets sent off the issuer. So couple thoughts on this, couple points on this. In terms of linking to the original PAN, if we have it, we can link them, but typically what ends up happening is you end up getting tokens of tokens of tokens. It just happens to be the translation. But the PAR comment is interesting. PAR is payment account reference, PAR. And I think I said it incorrectly a little while ago. I said 25 digits, it's a 29-digit number. And talking to the issuers, I recently had a talk with Visa about this. They said, oh, this actually links specifically to that original card. So one of the things that we had questions about is, oh, can we facilitate householding through this? I have a card, my wife has a card. Will they link to the same PAR value? And the answer is no. Apparently, the way they want to do it, the way they've suggested that issuers do it, is that it links to the specific person within the account. So you can, in fact, do this. You can say, yep, I get the same value back. So it doesn't matter exactly what the card number is that you have, whether you have a DPAN or the what we call the FPAN, the functional PAN. It should link back to that exact same value. But that PAR value is not something you can use for payment. It's why they call it a reference. And of course, they made it bigger than a regular PAN because they want to make sure that the people are very clear that this is not something that you can use. I think it's also alphanumeric, so it's probably going to break some of the data checks and data validations as well if you try to stick it into, say, just a normal card payment number field.
Yes, we don't like to put letters into our number fields, do we?
Typically not.
So there's a follow-on question of, can you please explain common use cases for PAR?
Yeah, so PAR is being used by merchants to uniquely identify accounts, especially when they're trying to get anonymized or aggregated data from non-loyalty users. So there's a group of users out there, there's a group of customers that are never going to sign up for our loyalty programs. It's just an unfortunate fact of life. But I can, in fact, use the data to say, oh, this is the same customer that I saw online that came into my store. And even if they use a certain card number online, they keyed it, or they use their physical card in the store, or they tapped with their phone at the pump, I get the same value back. I get that same PAR value back. So that's a useful piece of information to me. I can potentially use that information to look up information regarding that consumer. So there's a few different cases here for research. There's a few cases. I don't believe you can use it for financial transactions or refunds. There may be eventually a use case there that you might be able to undo and reverse transactions with it. But right now we're just trying to get a grip on this big problem of, hey, I've got the same card number, but the DPAN and the FPAN are different. How do I ensure that this is really the same card? This ultimately came down to a case where, and I'll give you this. I'll give you this as the example. I'll correct myself a little bit on the refund point. Suppose I go into a store and I buy something. I go to Target, I buy something, and I tap my phone to purchase it. And my wife says, "No, you're stupid. That was a dumb thing to buy. I'm going to go take it back." And so, but she goes to the store and she's got a different phone. I have an Android. She's got an iPhone. We have the same account, but it's not tied together. And see, this is the problem that I was mentioning earlier. It should tie back to the same PAR, but now Visa has said it's not. Ultimately, what we're seeing is that we need to, if I take it back to the store and I use my physical card, I should be able to refund that, because they should say, hey, these are the two different card numbers. Oh no, but they go back to the same PAR. We should be able to validate those things. So this is kind of a Wild West kind of thing. I know I kind of contradicted myself a little bit in there, but this is why it's important. We're trying to all get grips on exactly what PAR does, and help us to disambiguate some of these differences we're seeing with DPANs and FPANs and everything mixing in the middle.
So one of the examples that you had walked through, one of the case studies had been, instead of having to represent your phone or represent your card, the receipt itself had the 3D barcode on it. Does that help alleviate some of the PAR issue that we're talking about here?
It does, because now we have record of that original card number. We can send that in on the refund, and we now no longer have to worry about representing that card, because we know that we're we're going to get it with the same value that was originally presented. So that does address a lot of those concerns and makes it easier and more frictionless for our consumers that are out there. And in general, we're having such a strong drive for, reduce friction all the time. I would argue that that friction is important to reduce as appropriate. So if I'm buying fuel, I want to have as little friction as possible. If I'm buying a $5,000 diamond ring, I might want a little bit of additional friction in there just to make sure that they verify who I am. But appropriate friction for the scenario, for the transaction is really key.
Very good point. Earlier, you used the term householding. Can you explain that?
Yeah, householding, which is something that we're trying to achieve, and it's difficult to do, is understanding who exactly, from a cardholder perspective, lives in the same household. And this is the frustration I was mentioning earlier. We're saying, hey, I've got a card and my wife has the same card for the same account, and maybe I've given an additional authorized cardholder card to my son or my daughter. In some of those cases, depending on the credit card company, when you look at the front of the card, it's the same card number, right? In some cases, it's a different card number, but ultimately behind the scenes, it comes out of the same account. So this is the concept of householding, saying, oh, all of these really belong to the same household. All of these really belong in the same group. This is how I can reward loyalty, or I can track behavior, understand it from a marketing perspective. That's what householding is saying, even though sometimes the card holder is separate, or the card name is separate, or the PAN or the DPAN or something is separate, they really tie back to the same account.
And that becomes very important in some of the loyalty programs when you're trying to collect points from all of your transactions.
It does, because it's a combination of rewarding that household, but also such that we want to be able to disambiguate some of the behaviors. I may like, again, I've mentioned the 100 grand. I'll buy my 100 grand candy bar, but my wife doesn't like those. She likes some other candy bar. And my son or my daughter may like a different one. So in some cases, it's valuable because we're able to show that the entire household participates and engages. But in other cases, we want to have that personalization. I don't want to be prompted with some with some product that is actually preferred by somebody else in my household.
And we aren't linking any of that information to people's internet histories yet, right? We won't get advertisements on the dispenser for things that we were looking at.
But you raised a really good point, which is that one of the things that merchants also have to be aware of is that data is extraordinarily valuable. There's a lot of vendors out there that are saying, come to me and I'll do all these really cool things with your data, and you have to be very careful to ensure that your data is not necessarily being sold, is not being used for their purposes. Your data is extraordinarily valuable, and you need to make sure that it is being handled and respected in that way, and that you're getting appropriately compensated for that when you do provide your data to other providers.
Very good. I am taking a quick look to see what additional questions. Is there anything that's come to mind, Dan, that you wanted to clarify or bring up?
I don't believe so. This has been a really fantastic webinar. I've enjoyed presenting it. Sharon and Donna, I can't thank you enough for the opportunity to present here again. And I really appreciate the questions from the audience. This has been great. I hope everybody has a fantastic day.
Yeah, thank you both so much for your sharing your knowledge. And Sharon, you did a great job moderating and handling the questions. We really appreciate both of you being here, and we appreciate all of the attendees taking time out of their day. Sharon, were you going to say something to wrap up?
I was simply going to thank Dan for all the things that we got to learn about today.
Yeah, it was very, very informative. He covered a lot of ground in a little bit of time. So we're very grateful to Dan and to Sharon, and thank you to all the attendees. And we hope that everyone enjoys the rest of your afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. It was my pleasure. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.